Anyone in here a farmer or used to be a farmer? No? How about a gardener at home? Okay, good. Anybody just mess around with your lawn too? Just landscaping? That's what we've been doing. In August, it will be the first year anniversary that Dave and I have lived in our home. Neither of us had been a homeowner before, so this past year has been a learning experience for us. In the wintertime, our pipes froze, so we learned about that. And then this spring, we went out into our backyard and checked out kind of how the landscaping looked, and clearly the person who lived there before the person we bought from had cared about the landscaping. I had some tulips pop up and some daffodils, but choking out all that work was the weeds left from the person we bought the house from. I don't think he cared. He was a young bachelor, and I think he just said, forget about those daffodils and tulips. So we were going to try and figure out what to do. Neither of us had a lot of experience. We had no experience. There's not much lawn at the apartment. So we decided, in fact, to just kill all this area around our patio with some Roundup. Instead of pulling out these weeds, some of them are this high, instead of pulling them out, we just killed the grass along with the weeds, and we're going to lay rocks down instead. So that was another learning experience we had. That's what I thought of immediately when I was reading through this parable. I think it's funny. The workers, went to the farmer and they say, didn't you plant good seed? Well, what farmer didn't plant good seed? What was he going to say? Oh, no, I planted those weeds. No. The enemy came in the night and planted the weeds, planted the bad seed. When I thought about this parable, the first thing I thought was, Jesus gives us the opportunity to grow until the harvest time. Dave and I killed everything. We killed the good with the bad. Jesus says, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until the harvest time and see which are the weeds and which are the good seeds, instead of accidentally pulling out some of the good with the bad. I think that is something we should be grateful for, that chance, that opportunity. We don't know when the harvest will be, but we have time to grow in goodness. Looking again at the parable, we see that the weeds did not immediately appear. Everything has to take its time to grow. They didn't notice the weeds until the wheat started to fruit, and that's when they could tell the difference. It's the same in life. We don't always notice. As I was telling the kids, we don't always notice the good from the bad. It's not always immediately obvious. It is obvious by the fruit, by people's fruit. The good and the bad plants essentially look the same until they start to fruit. And good and bad people essentially look the same until you consider their fruit. Jesus talks a lot about people and their fruit. He says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 20, you will know them by their fruit. There was once a young man who liked to shimmy down the old fruit tree in his backyard. After everyone else went to bed, that was his time. That was his route to freedom. Climbed down that old fruit tree and went and hung out with his buddies and partied the night away. Well, one day his dad came up to him one morning and he said, I'm going to cut down that old fruit tree. It hasn't borne fruit for years, and it's just wasting that space there. He said, I'm going to cut that old tree down. The next night, the young man and his friends brought a bushel of apples to the tree, and they decided they were going to climb up and tie strings to the apples, make it look like this tree had borne fruit. The next morning, Dad came up to the young man's room. He pretended to be amazed that this tree had sprouted apples overnight. It's amazing. The boy thought he was in the clear. And Dad said, you might have had me, but that was a pear tree, not an apple tree. Our fruit is like that. Our fruit is important, and it should represent who we are. So what is our fruit? What am I talking about? Well, in Galatians, it's pretty clear what fruit we should be looking for. People who have been transformed by Christ, believers, They should show the fruit of the Spirit. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23, it tells us what that is. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If there's anyone in this room who can examine themselves right now and say that they have perfect fruit in each of these categories, come up to me afterwards and let me know how you get perfect fruit in those areas, because I have some room to grow still. I need some better fruit. I'll tell you one area, and it's embarrassing, that I will admit that I need to grow in my fruit, and that is the area of self-control. So many of you have been complimentary to me about how I've lost some weight this year, and I thank you, but it has been a battle for me. Self-control, especially with food, is a battle. A few years ago, I worked at the United Methodist Children's Home in Mount Vernon, and I had the opportunity every morning to write a daily devotion. I sent it out on email, and a lot of people who worked at that company were able to read my daily devotion. Well, one morning I got brave and I talked to them about self-control in my devotion. And I talked about how I have a battle with McDonald's. I drive past McDonald's, I did, on my way to work every morning, and most days I lost the battle and I would go get a breakfast bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit. You guys know those, right? They're delicious. I would go get one of those bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits, even though I knew they were terrible for me, and I was trying to work on this. And I would feel like I'd lost the battle. Just eat that bagel on the way to work, or that biscuit on the way to work. So I wrote all about it in this devotion, and I talked about how I needed to work on that area. And I hoped that maybe sharing my struggle would encourage other people to work on their struggles. What I didn't hope for, what I didn't count on, was that everyone was going to hold me accountable. Once they knew what my struggle was, suddenly in the morning, people would come up to me and say, "Now, did you get a bagel on the way to work?" So that's actually a good thing, because it did hold me accountable. And we should do that for each other. We should be vulnerable and share those areas where we could be growing and doing better, so that our friends can unfortunately elbow us and tell us where we could be working on that. It's an opportunity to grow. That God gives us, to grow in these areas. I'm going to read them again. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are areas where we should have abundant fruit. It reminds me when I first became a Christian as an adult, I thought you had to do a lot of good things, good tasks. And I lived in the apartment, like I said, and my neighbor lady was elderly and had a difficult time bending over to grab her morning paper. And so I would leave every morning and I would think, I better grab her paper and put it up. Some days her paper was soaking wet and I would think, I can't believe I have to grab this paper. And I would have the worst attitude about grabbing her paper, just a silly little thing. But it just shows you, like that character I was talking about with the kids, sometimes we can be nice, but it's not truth. It's not sincere. Nothing is really cheerful about the way we're giving inside. And that's what these fruits should represent, the sincere nature of who you are. Not the things you do, but who you are, who you've become through Christ. The disciples asked Jesus, "Why do you speak in parables?" And he had a couple different reasons. One reason was because he was fulfilling the prophecy. But another reason, a hard reason to accept, that he explained was because the people didn't understand. In Matthew 13, verse 13, he says, "The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. Their hearts have grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing. They shut their eyes so that they might not look with their eyes and listen with their ears, and they don't understand with their heart." It says Jesus told the multitudes to leave. He sent them away. And the implication there is that they were none the wiser. After hearing Jesus himself with his spiritual stories and lessons and his sermons and these parables, he sent them away. How often do we hear a sermon and leave none the wiser? How often do I hear words of truth and they're just words? I don't let them grow inside of me. The disciples were humble, and they were not ashamed to admit that they didn't quite understand. Jesus, in a rare instance, explained the parable of the weeds to them. He talks about some things that are difficult to talk about the end of the harvest. When some will be thrown into the fiery furnace, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It says the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And we know none of us are righteous except through him. We have the opportunity to grow in these fruits of the Spirit, but the true transformation is through Christ. But we don't know how much time we have until the harvest. But we know that there are people who we could help save from the fiery furnace. And we know that we have a lot to do as we grow. So I just encourage you and myself to not let the opportunity to grow in these fruits of the Spirit. Don't let the opportunity pass. Thank you.